This is Dr. Jerome Corsi, and today it's Tuesday. It's March 5th, 2024. This is the Truth Central. Thank you for joining us, thetruthcentral.com. And if you follow me on X, it's Corsi. It's Corsi Jerome, at Corsi Jerome 1. All small letters all together. And in Substack, it's JeromeCorsiPhD.substack.com. So please follow me on both, and we'll be posting new things on Substack in the next few days. Okay, let's go to the key stories on the news today. I want to start out with this Houthi missile that hit a Swiss-owned container ship near Aden, and this is in the Red Sea, coming through the Suez Canal, heading towards the Indian Ocean. And so what's happening is you have the Red Sea, which was one of the most important maritime trade routes, going from the Mediterranean into India and to China, is now become a war zone because these Iranian-backed Houthi rebels they've withstood dozens of bombing raids by U.S. and U.K. fighter jets. The Biden administration's Operation Prosperity Guardian continues to fail as another tanker ship was hit on Tuesday. So the U.S. Central Command was posting on social media that MSC Sky 2, a container ship operated by MSC Mediterranean Shipping Company, I think it was under a Swiss flag, was hit by the Houthi rebels. They fired an anti-ship ballistic missile from Yemen into the southern Red Sea. It impacted the water with no damage to U.S. Navy ships, but it did hit the Swiss flagged ship, which did considerable damage to it. So it was like actually a Liberian-flagged, Swiss-owned container vessel. One of the missiles impacted the vessel, causing damage. Initial reports said there were no injuries, and the ship didn't request assistance. It continued on its way, but it was hit by a missile. Now, what's interesting about this is two things. Number one, it's disrupting international trade, because if we can't use the Suez Canal safely, it's going to cause a lot more time and money to go around the Cape of Good Hope, the tip of Africa, in order to get to India and China from the Mediterranean or the Atlantic. This is going to cause, again, extra expense, disruption to supply chains. It's going to be an economic disaster over a long period of time, and there doesn't seem to be any way that these Houthi rebels are going to be stopped. They're very mobile. They have small boats. They're well-trained. They're experienced out of Yemen. The Somalians and the Yemen, both of these countries have produced kind of pirates, as it were, with these small little ships being able to attack commercial shipping. And Iran is funding it. So the key story here is that Iran is, again, continuing to expand the terrorism and the violence in the Middle East. And Israel is systematically going through Gaza and has not stopped. A recent peace effort again failed. The United Nations, the Biden administration, keeps threatening that they're going to recognize a Palestinian state. That's the new initiative. And again, the sympathy for Israel has diminished significantly worldwide. You find that the protests are in support of Hamas, and Hamas has got the campuses in the United States which have gone Marxist. And the union between Marxism and radical Islam has been noted many times. David Horowitz was one of the first to write about it almost a decade ago, maybe 20 years ago. Again, but they both align on that Marxism hates the United States, hates capitalism, hates prosperity, and so do the radical Islamicists. They hate Christianity. They hate anything that has to do with prosperity. So the idea here is that we are in a destructive cycle right now, and it's intensifying. The violence in the Middle East has extended now, with Israel hitting into Lebanon to attack Hezbollah, which has been sending rockets into Israel, northern Israel. We've had bases attacked, U.S. bases attacked in both Syria and Iraq by these Revolutionary Guard posts that Iran has stationed in both countries. We're finding now the Houthi rebels are also causing difficulty here in the Red Sea. So you've got a number of countries involved already at war. And Israel, I don't think, is going to stop until they completely clear out Hamas from Gaza. They're going to at least take this time to solidify the idea that they're going to be secure from Hamas attacks right at this Gaza Strip, which is right there north of Egypt, right on the Mediterranean in Israel. And it has been a hotbed of terrorism for a long time. The Palestinians are committed to the destruction of Israel. And as such, it's going to be very, very difficult to have a Palestinian state that is not viewed by radical Islam as a temporary step towards the destruction of Israel. You're not going to get an unarmed Palestinian state or an unarmed Hamas, because they are dedicated with Iran to destroying Israel and killing Jews. This insanity is continuing to go on. The other story that I thought disturbed me, actually, seeing it happen, I've been predicting it, and we've been talking about it on this show for weeks, but there's now open reports that the EU is going to shift to the European arms industry, and they're going into war economy mode. Reuters is reporting this today. Reuters is saying that the European Commission will propose ways for the European Union to boost its arms industry so it can shift to a war economy mode in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, Putin is repeatedly warning that if Europe gets involved directly in Iran, that Moscow is going to retaliate. And Putin has said clearly, and so has Medvedev, that this risks nuclear war. And it's the first time, I think, since 1962 in the Cuban Missile Crisis that we're edging towards nuclear war in a serious way. Jack Kennedy prevented that in 1962 by reaching out to Khrushchev and back-channeling and getting an agreement to step down our missiles in Turkey and Khrushchev's Russian missiles in Cuba. I don't see that happening here, because you've got the Biden administration continuing to push to fund Ukraine with more arms. You've got the Europeans saying Putin's going to be in Berlin if we don't stop him in Ukraine. And they're trying to scare the Baltic nations that Putin will next go after Finland to get access to the Atlantic through the Baltic Sea. Of course, the NATO idiots begin to consider the Baltic Sea as the NATO lake. This has started, if we go back to the roots of this, going back 10 years more to 2014, 2013, Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State, was pushing for NATO to expand into Ukraine. She was getting money from Pinochet, who was an oligarch in Ukraine, giving money to the Clinton Foundation, and Hillary Clinton was bending U.S. policy to get Ukraine into NATO. When that didn't entirely work, it didn't work initially, they're still pushing it. We had the Maidan rebellion, a revolution in 2014, which overthrew Yanukovych, who was a duly elected Ukrainian president, favorable to Russia. The State Department did that together again with Hillary Clinton and with the support of George Soros. It was a color revolution. There was a time when the Arab Spring was going on. You remember that with under Obama, when they were having all these overthrows of these northern African countries and pushing everything in a Marxist direction. Obama is a Marxist. I said this in 2008 when I wrote Obamanation. He was raised by Frank Marshall Davis, who was a committed communist who came from Chicago to Hawaii, where he was trying to turn Hawaii into a communist state. And that was the big move in the 50s and 60s. They thought they could get Hawaii to go communist. And it failed. but they were organizing through the unions to have a communist government take over Hawaii. So, and this has been going on for a long time. But the point is that Ukraine is remaining open and the war is continuing. Why? Because it's convenient for the State Department, for the CIA, for the Biden family, all engaged in corruption. The corruption of the left is massive. Several things are happening. We're beginning to realize that the pedophilia, the Jeffrey Epstein, this Weinstein, Harvey Weinstein. Now, these cases prove that all the discussion about pedophilia in Hollywood were true. Because, again, this was pervasive and also into government. It's still being hidden, but pedophilia is rampant. And one of the other aspects of an open border or war in Ukraine is a lot of children are abandoned by their parents. Their parents are killed. They're dislocated by the migration, and they get picked up and brought into sex slavery. Also, the drugs coming across the border. The Biden family might as well be owned by the drug cartels. China's pumping fentanyl in through the border. Something like $10 million worth of fentanyl was picked up last few days at the border, interrupted by the Border Patrol. And the Border Patrol is saying that Biden has no real serious interest in controlling the border. And all this talk about border security and the like is not going to happen. There's no move to build a wall. There's no real serious move, even by the government in Texas. Governor Abbott is not really doing very much to secure the border. He's got the National Guard down there, but it's not stopping the flow. You're going to have barriers up there. You're going to have some kind of a wall in order to make it more difficult for these immigrants to come into the country. Now, the problem with the immigrants coming into the country, as they are doing, is that they include the criminals. Countries are dumping their prisons onto the United States. We have people from the Middle East. We've got people from all over the world coming in through this base in Central America where they're being organized. And the Biden administration saving some of them the difficulty of walking to the border by flying them into the United States. The idea that the Biden administration wants to secure the border is nonsense. Remember, it's Obama who's running the country. The things we learned out of the Putin interview that Tucker Carlson did were really twofold. Biden is not in charge. And then that was affirmed by the Justice Department, saying that Biden is not mentally competent, so he can't be prosecuted. Isn't that convenient? So he's not mentally competent to be prosecuted. He can't remember when his son died, or he can't remember important details in his life, but yet he can be president. I mean, this isn't insane. I don't know what is. And there's stories today that Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton are propping up Biden and want Biden to be to run for re-election. On the other side, you've got Obama, who's, I'm sure, prepping Michelle to run. And the great expectation is that Biden will not be the candidate. But the Democrats are going to wait certainly until after the primaries, when they can. Biden will win the primaries. He'll be the presumptive nominee. And then either he'll be impeached or he'll have some kind of a mental incident, or they'll remove him one way or the other. And then a substitute. Wouldn't even be surprised if Hillary wants to run again, although I'm not sure she's physically capable of doing it. She had a hard time in 2016. This is 8 years later. She's not going to be in good shape. So all these are insanity. We're dealing with dysfunction. There's also dysfunction in the economy. Continue to be reports that the banks are really in difficulty. If the banks truly mark their assets to market, they're holding too many treasury securities, too many treasury notes, where they had zero interest under the Obama administration. And now with interest rates at or above 5%, those bonds have to be deeply discounted. So if they mark them to market, their asset base would be troubled. And we're going into a season where we're going to have commercial real estate failing. So what I really encourage you to do is seriously get a hold of this book, which is happening. Everything I've written in this book is coming true. Take a look at you can get a free copy of How the Coming Global Crash, which is in the process of happening, will create an historic gold rush by calling Swiss America at 1-800-519-6114. 1-800-519-6268. 1-800-519-6268. The book shows how in previous economic crises, 1973, the OPEC oil crisis, and Jimmy Carter's insanity and inability to run the economy caused gold to double. Then 2008, 2009, with the subprime real estate failing, again, gold doubled. It's going to happen again. Gold has been trading consistently above 2,000. I'm going to see where it is right today, what we're talking. Just let me Google it, see where gold price is right now. But it has been consistently up above 2,000. Right now it's at $2,051 an ounce. It will break $2,100 an ounce, I think, in the reasonable future. This is the time to get into gold with some of your money. It will appreciate while your dollars are going to continue to rapidly depreciate. Okay, now I've covered a few other stories. And by the way, this whole idea of Europe gearing up for war, I want to do a couple more paragraphs here in this Reuters story where the European EU is encouraging to increase. The EU is actually encouraging countries to buy more weapons, to produce more weapons, and to arm. We need to change the paradigm and move into a war economy mode. This is what Thierry Breton, the European Industry Commissioner, another unelected position, is saying. And this idea that Europe is going into a war mode is now in the open. So, okay, we had a pandemic that broke the economy. Then we have this climate cult craze, all about carbon dioxide is going to kill us all because the Earth's going to be too warm. Nonsense. Carbon dioxide is a minor molecule. I'm going to cover that in a minute. So that now we are the climate change movement is dying, and I'm going to cover a couple other movements that are dying. But the point on the left is really, I think, being exposed as completely fraudulent again. All the left can do is destroy. All the left can do is teach nonsense to our children in schools. The universities, they're producing a bunch of white racists. There's a video out saying, interviewing a bunch of white college students who say that voter registration laws are racist because black people don't have identification. Then they interviewed a bunch of black people, and everybody's got identification. You don't walk around in the United States without identification. And this whole idea that we don't have voting registration, you've got to have a driver's license to drive a car. You get asked for your ID all the time, including getting onto an airplane. So, but you can vote. Don't worry about it. We'll have mail-in, drop-in ballot boxes where you can just dump tens of thousands of ballots and nobody cares, and they'll all be counted as long as they are written out for Biden. The idea that Biden won in 2020 is being seriously challenged every day now. And by the way, with Trump getting through the Supreme Court at a 9-0 vote that threw out this ridiculous argument that the 14th Amendment, a Civil War amendment, because Biden says that Trump was an insurrectionist on the march into the Capitol. It's all nonsense. It's all Larry Tribe lawfare, where they make up these arguments and which have specious value in terms of real legal arguments, but yet they advance it for a political agenda. And the goal was simply to try to legally prohibit Trump from being on the ballot. It's failed. It's done. The Supreme Court said it's nonsense, which it was. And Trump is getting through these law cases. He's going to appeal this 300 and whatever it was $1 million fine in New York. And the case in Georgia has completely come off the rails with this Fannie Willis completely embarrassing herself during the hearing looking into her misconduct with her lover on government money being hired as the prosecutor in that case. It is pathetic what the left is doing. We have Soros appointed judges, Soros elected judges. Well, not really. He backs them with money and the Democrats vote for them, who are releasing criminals onto the streets every day. We are in a complete disaster in the United States with our debt now at going to $34 trillion. which is national debt, which is remarkably high, and there's no end in sight. This Friday, the government's going to shut down unless they pass another continuing resolution, which they almost certainly will do, with the Mitch McConnell and Speaker Johnson saying, "Oh, this is horrible," and then they all vote for it. Our entire government is on the take, and Nancy Pelosi and her husband making money on the stock market from insider information. The entire Congress being bought and sold by China one way or the other, and what they're doing now, and the new thing in Washington D.C. for the congressional leaders, Senate and House, is to have these cocaine sex parties, where of course everybody is taped, and now they're owned by blackmailers. This whole rotten system stinks, and I think the American people are becoming aware of it and are getting sick and tired of it. We're sick and tired of these politicians making all this money when people have to worry about higher costs of energy, which are going on because of the energy transition to wind and solar, which don't work. All the ideas of the left are broke. They are designed not to work. That's the hard part to realize. They were designed not to work. They were designed to destroy capitalism. They were designed to kill people because the left has a depopulationist agenda. Let's go to another story. I've covered several here today on the breakup of this leftist agenda. So Wall Street is rapidly abandoning the DEI, which is diversity, equity, inclusion, which means you've got to hire people based on their race. And when you start dealing with the left, this insanity, they have intersectionality, which means how many discriminations can you compound? Well, if you're a woman, you're clearly discriminated against because all women are discriminated against, right? They're not equal to men, right? That's what everybody says on the left. Well, women are different than men. And, I guess the left hasn't noticed that yet. They might take a look. But so if you're a woman, you get 1 point. Black woman, 2 points. Black woman born somewhere else, like in Africa, another point, coming from an underdeveloped country. Then your sex is, you're really transgender, more points. But you're transgender because you have an animal sex, transgender animal. And then you're transgender animal, but you're really living a reincarnated life from ancient Egypt. Now, that's the person who's going to be chairman of the board. They may not know anything, but they've got all the right characteristics, all the right identities. And if the left is just into this identity nonsense, the problem is that they got this into investors. So for months, this DEI and ESG, the left is great on these initials. Diversity, equity, inclusion. Does that sound good? ESG. These things are social governance. Forget it. It's all a motto that means we're going to destroy universities, we're going to destroy cultures. And so the pushback on DEI has been enormous, with entire universities and corporations slashing their DEI departments. This is what Shubha Berry, the former head of diversity at Merrill Lynch, told Bloomberg this past weekend. We are past the peak. They're way past the peak. When Claudine Gay, running Harvard, a black woman, again, high points on DEI, plagiarized her dissertation. So the report says that Wall Street is now under attack because they're getting lawsuits. For example, Goldman Sachs has adjusted its Possibilities Summit, previously exclusive to black college students, to now welcome white students as well. Well, that's horrible. Isn't that awful? Why should we let white students in? Aren't they the ones who are the oppressors? What nonsense. So Bank of America has expanded its internal program, initially aimed at women and minorities, to include all employees. Really? Well, the Supreme Court decided in a major decision that you could not use race to get specialty points on admission. So all this affirmative action nonsense, which we've had now with the left for decades, is being thrown out because it doesn't work. It wasn't intended to work. It was intended to fail. Okay, so when you look at the ranks of big banks that have been hiring black employees, it's been risen. So white people make up about 14% of the total population, and their representation in the senior roles at banks like Citibank, J.P. Morgan, and Goldman remains really fairly consistently with the proportion of the population, and the percentage of blacks have increased dramatically with this DEI. Okay, now it doesn't increase dramatically for Asians because they're not included. And also the investment funds that invest on DEI have low performance. And so they are subject to lawsuits from the holders of mutual funds and other investments where the owners, the people for whom the economic benefit is supposed to derive, are losing significantly potential gains because they're investing in DEI. They're paying for this diversity, not for excellence or for performance. So we're producing in the schools a group of people who will answer yes, racism to everything, but what are they going to do with their with their critical race theory or their queer theory PhD when it comes to actually doing a job? They're not going to be able to function very well. So DEI is dying. DEI should be DIE. That's the fundamental reality of this nonsense. And I think people are beginning to wake up. I think it's becoming clear to people that this is a disaster. Okay, now another story that caught my attention this morning was that this is happening across the board. So a survey was done to ask the younger generations how much they would spend to get climate action, to actually go to net zero. So a poll was taken which said that these radical climate change warriors in the White House, which have made it their mission to destroy the fossil fuel industry and with that the economy, but they're brainwashing as many young as they can to believing there's an immediate climate crisis. We're all going to die. But a new poll shows that these young people would 50%, more than 50, only half of the young people would spend $10 a month on climate action. It's ridiculous. So the Daily Mail obtained a copy of a new survey commissioned by CRC Research for the 85 Fund, reveals that fewer than half of the respondents aged 18 to 34 would spend $10 a month to combat climate, which is ridiculous. So what it means is all of this is just virtue signaling. It's a cult. It's in the universities, it's among the kids. CRC showed how young people are vocal about climate change, but fail to spend their own money fixing it. It could be due to the era of failed Bidenomics. This inflation continues to crush households in the middle class. But despite these claims that the climate needs urgent action, all you're getting is the young people are virtue signaling. The rank hypocrisy, posturing as climate alarmists, is obvious when they refuse to put their money where their mouths are. And they're not serious as citizens or voters or as human beings. It reminds me of the House Democrats who are losing their minds over the Supreme Court decision that you couldn't use the 14th Amendment to bar Trump from the ballot. So once the Supreme Court decided that, the House Democrats are now preparing legislation to try to keep Trump off the ballot. Congress will have to act, said Representative Jamie Raskin, a Democrat from Maryland, the ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, in a comment to this creepy deep state mouthpiece Axios, which I follow every day with their leftist spin on the news, more propaganda. So Raskin says he's going to introduce legislation with Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz, another left nutcase, who had to resign as head of the DNC in 2016 when Julian Assange dumped a bunch of emails showing that Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Hillary Clinton had colluded to prevent Bernie Sanders from winning enough primary seats to get the nomination, which he might have done had they not colluded against him. And they did that with their special delegates. It was really a rigged system. At any rate, Rankin and Debbie Wasserman Schultz want to create a pathway for the Justice Department to keep candidates off the ballot under the 14th Amendment. We're going to revise the legislation in light of the Supreme Court decision. So they're now working on federal legislation to remove Trump from the ballot. More lawfare. I mean, they just never lose and they never stop because they just continue to do anything insane with bending the law as long as they can get Donald Trump. They are insane to get Donald Trump. And I'm saying, and have been saying now for weeks, that the October surprise, if they can't get Donald Trump off the ballot any other way, was these left nut cases will go to nuclear war and then just cancel the voting because of the war. Of course, we've had presidential elections during the Civil War, World War I, World War II, and there's no precedent for canceling an election, but they will try. Or there's a couple more stories out on the climate today. So I think this whole leftist agenda is dying as it gets exposed for what it is. It's godless. It is evil. It is aimed to destroy. It's depopulationist at its heart, and it's going to fail. So 2 more stories here. The former World Bank economist is saying that this whole idea of going to carbon-free net zero is ridiculous. So this is by a former World Bank economist who's published a new study from the Global Warming Policy Foundation, Professor Gordon Hughes's paper, which comes 2 weeks after the European Climate Investment Deficit Report warned the EU member states would have to fill an annual investment gap of 406 billion euro if 2030 climate goals are to be met. And what Hughes reveals is that a realistic estimate of Britain's planned energy transition has an astronomical price tag. Large investments in capital-intensive technologies for producing and consuming non-carbon energy is estimated to be a minimum of 5% of GDP for the next 2 decades, and it might easily exceed 7.5% of gross domestic product. What Hughes said is ignoring the macroeconomic and fiscal constraints will almost certainly lead to yet another long-run policy fiasco that will achieve little and concrete results. Rather than pretense and muddle, it would be better to extend the period and pace of the climate transition to match the resources that can be realistically afforded. In other words, just abandon it. Put out the net zero target from 2050 to 2070 or 2075 or 20 never. If they don't do either one, all that's happening is that the climate nutcases are pretending to be making progress with the spending at high levels. Meanwhile, the projects like the wind projects fail. Private investors will not fund them as soon as the government subsidies die. Electric vehicles are sitting unsold on the lots. Car companies are saying they're going to abandon their goals to produce increasing numbers of electric vehicles. They don't work. And that was something that we should have known from the beginning. Electric vehicles were the first automobiles, and they never worked. That's why we went to gas combustion engines. They work. Okay, well, but we don't like those because that produces economic progress. Now, the last story I want to cover today is the International Energy Agency is reporting that global energy-related carbon dioxide emissions hit a record high in 2023. So this record high was produced by the increased use of fossil fuels in countries throughout the world like India and China, which have gone to using coal. So of course there's going to be more carbon dioxide. But the Earth has not heated up dangerously. Instead, the Earth is getting greener, which is positive. Carbon dioxide is plant food. We need carbon dioxide in the carbon cycle in order to exist. If we don't have carbon dioxide, which is pumped, by the way, into greenhouses to make them grow more abundantly, we're not going to have drastic climate change. We had more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere 600 million years ago. But China is now benefiting from the wind and solar because they're going to be making the wind turbines, they're going to be making the solar panels, they're going to be making the EVs and undercutting everybody in the world with slave labor. They have a corner of the market on the rare earth minerals that are needed to produce the batteries. And China's positioned to make money off of this craze while the rest of the world, like Germany, deindustrializes. While in the United States, we have insanity in our boardrooms worrying about DEI with these self-appointed DEI panels given credence in corporate governance to come in and overrule a chief executive hiring somebody who can actually do the job. Not case insanity. Okay, so it's not doing anything. All of this nonsense on climate change, the whole purpose under Obama of Solyndra and these other projects was to make sure his campaign finance committee and donors from 2008 got paydays. All the government funds were poured into this that was taken by his campaign finance committee funders. Peter Schweitzer has demonstrated this in several books. And it's the same with Biden. People who are getting the money are people who support his agenda. Then the projects fail, nobody goes to prison, and we've spent more billions of dollars we don't have. Now, I'm going to wrap up here with the themes that I think we're at, which are essentially that this is a spiritual battle. And I'm going to ask Chris to comment before we do, to transition here to a conclusion on what, in fact, Chris, what's your take on the stories we've covered today?
It's amazing how many people just don't realize the damage the Paris Accords is going or are going to do in the future. They don't realize American taxpayers have to throw in $10 billion a year. The richer countries are throwing in a bit lower, but we're all footing the bill to give to these third world countries who have no obligation at all to lower emissions. So whatever these neo hippies really wanted was never going to happen. They all knew it. The only people that don't know it are the ones who celebrate the Paris Accords on social media saying, yay, this is so great, we're back in. They don't even know where the money goes or how it's being spent. That annoys me more than anything else.
Well, it's, what we've got here is a racket going on where the money is just being pumped out, spent, stolen.
I'm here in Rico.
Yeah, I mean, so all the money going to Ukraine goes to the arms manufacturers in Alabama, okay, wherever they are in the United States. We ship over the arms. The arms get stolen and resold to the Middle East and get recycled into the violence in the Middle East. And we keep losing territory. Now Russia's going after Odessa, probably the only port in the Black Sea that Ukraine holds of any significance. They'll eventually take Odessa, and Putin will eventually take Kiev. Eventually, the Ukrainians have depleted so much of their military. The country is a mess. People have evacuated large areas of the country, and the refugee crisis is enormous. But again, go ahead.
Just like McConnell said, McConnell always says it. Well, it's okay because the money is going to Americans. It's going to the defense sector. Yes.
Mitch McConnell needs to
do this.
He needs to retire.
Now, Jerry, you should know that that we should make sure the Democrats slow down a little bit while we collect some money here.
Yeah, right. That's about the size of it. And the stealing, the money, the graft, the corruption, the sexual abuses are evident. And the Democratic Party is a Marxist party, plain and simple. And the youth who have been energized have wasted their youth not being educated. Their heads are filled with this Marxist nonsense, which will get them nowhere in life.
Oh, no, hold on. They're not being Marxist. And then the Chinese aren't influencing anybody. They'd never do such a thing.
Right. China's their best friend.
I like my McDonnell impersonations. They're pretty funny.
Well,
no, I'm just kidding.
I'm glad you like them.
No, I don't think anybody likes them. They're terrible, really. They're really bad.
But they're okay. Don't worry about it. They're fun. So look, in the end, God always wins. God's going to win here too. And I really want to support the comments made by Archbishop Vigano or Vigano. In Italian, they say Vigano. He's right on the point in a lot of his various proclamations, and I'm following him very closely because what he's clearly saying is that this is a spiritual war, and we are at final days. This is a spiritual battle we're fighting. It is what the apocalypse. We are seeing diseases unleashed. We're seeing wars unleashed. We'll be seeing famine, and it's intentional. The world knows what's going on, and yet there's nothing done to stop it. I'll just read a couple of sentences and paragraphs. What Archbishop Vigano is saying is many have discovered too late they've been victims of a global plan with a single script under a single direction. What is even more serious is that this neo-Malthusian project of mass extermination, which is what we're experiencing, to which is added the will to control each of us through all kinds of evil moves, World Economic Forum, World Health Organization, so that these rulers of the Western states, which are hostages to Bill Gates and Klaus Schwab, have become accomplices to this crime, demonstrating their malice and premeditation by their behavior, falsifying data, lying, doctoring statistics, doing everything they can to promote war, which is rampant right at the moment. We are in World War III. And he says, this attack, unprecedented in the history of the human race, we have witnessed the complicity of all national and international institutions. And they're violating human rights left and right. We are aware of the perpetrators of this crime against God and humanity, and we need to do something about it. It starts with us coming back to God, and I encourage everyone in the spirit of 2 Chronicles 7:14, let's get on our knees and let's ask God's favor that we repent for having killed so many babies in the womb, torn them to pieces by these vicious abortionists, sold their body parts, put children from their parents, dislocated by coming across the border or war, into sex slavery. It's evil. And the evil is running loose and rampant right now in the world. And the solution of us getting on our knees and asking God to forgive us, needing to repent for this disaster we've created, this leftist ideology, God will hear our prayer and heal our land. We've got to get God back into our schools, into our hearts, into the public square, into our marriages. Too many of the young are not marrying, not having children. They're not living a life which is meant to be fulfilled by mature relationships in a marriage, children, and these are being devastated. A morally weakened people cannot be free long, and that's the risk we're running. But I don't believe God created the human race to fail. We'll have a judgment of God, but I think I see major signs that this satanic insanity is making our universities so ridiculous, making our climate change policies so dysfunctional, that the American people are finally waking up, and worldwide, hopefully, we will have a great awakening. That's the only solution here. But I do believe it will happen. It's just going to be painful. in the end, God always wins. God will win here too. This is Dr. Jerome Corsi. We're doing podcasts on thetruthcentral.com, and we're endeavoring here to tell you the truth, which you will not hear on the mainstream media. Turn off Fox, turn off the television. It's just a babble box. And we are now at the edge of having to decide as a human race whether we're going to go forward or whether we're going to go back into the caves. I think we'll go forward. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back again tomorrow with another podcast, thetruthcentral.com. God bless.